Good morning, everybody. What a good looking group. Never mind. It was a spot on my glasses. Okay. So why don't we just add a little bit of mystery to the lesson this morning? So I'm going to put something on the board. It's a shape. And just look at it. Okay. Dan says it's a bow tie. Everybody agree with that? Okay, we'll get around to it. I got plenty of time. Plenty of time, and we'll see how much material I've got. I know that Dan was kind enough to post what I should be talking about today. And it was heroes, because I talked to Dan about it last week. And I promised Jax Fisher that I would talk about heroes at some point in time. But after hearing Brad Trick talk about goings on at the temple, I felt like we might want to close the issue about the destruction of the temple this week. And it looks like I'll have enough time that I do have some things about heroes in the Bible listed. So as we go on and think about the destruction of the temple, and we finish that, then we're going to kind of transition into your heroes in the Bible. I'm sure we can always pick out a half dozen or whatever heroes in the Bible, or heroes in your secular life, especially when you're younger and more impressionable than you are now. I grew up as a baby boomer. My mother was 35 when I was born, so she wasn't quite ready to start all over having kids, but we did anyway. She soon found out that a Crosley TV was the best babysitter ever invented. So that's before that people realized that watching too much TV at an early age caused Dame Bramage. So here I am, a product. Here I am. I guess I'm a product of Dame Bramage, early age. Okay. Let's talk about the destruction of the temple. Jesus revered the temple and wanted to see the worship of God continued there. His reverence makes his words in Matthew 24, 1 through 2 startling. When his disciples commented to him on the beauty of the temple building, he uttered the prophecy that not a stone would be left standing. Not one stone left on top of the other. So if you can think back on Bible history, just consider how large the temple would have been. Considering that the temple proper covered about 35 acres. Now, that wasn't all buildings. A lot of it was massive inner courts, outer courts, and things like that. His prophetic words were fulfilled in 70 CE when Roman armies destroyed the temple as punishment for local resistance to Roman rule. So even though that they may not have had a problem with the temple, they knew that the temple was a sacred place, and to get into the Jewish or Christian hearts at that time was to attack the temple and destroy it completely. Let's pray. Eternal God, give us hope in the face of tragedy and holy impatience. When human greed and lust for power cause tragedies to occur. Amen. So this was a tragedy in the life of Christians in Jews like. So let's start out by reading the scriptures. And so I'm going to read the first set of scriptures and then we're going to talk about it. And I'd like for this to be an open discussion. So anything that pops into your mind about the scriptures or any comments that I may make or what you've heard about the scriptures, please, I'm going to do like Bristol Darling used to do. They on the Andy Griffith show. You know, Andy just said, well, what key we're going to sing, and Bristol would say, it don't matter. Just jump on, grab a key and hang on. A 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's kind of what it's going to be. I enjoy hearing what you guys have to say because that helps me along my Christian walk and understanding. Yes, BJ.
I changed my mind. I was going to say that about that, but now after you talked about the temple, I think it's a golden chalice.
Okay. I like that. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, so what was the golden chalice used for in the temple?
That was the big sacrifice that held the blood.
Okay. Well, figuratively, did it hold the blood?
No, actually it held.
It actually did.
But I suppose.
Okay. Okay. The animal, so it was actually caught in the golden chalice. Okay.
DJ said
that. Well, sure. I mean, he's probably been closer to it than most of us. Have you been to the temple?
Yes.
Never been to the temple. Okay. Well, I think we're going to touch on part of that because the only part of the temple still stands. And what's that called? The Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is still there. And it's still a massive wall. It's huge. What is it? 50 feet tall, possibly. It was the eastern side of the temple, of Solomon, because the temple of Herod was built over the temple of Solomon. And the temple of Solomon was torn down centuries before it was ever rebuilt as the temple of Herod. And the eastern wall, because they had actually scraped off part of the temple mount to make it level or make it a foundation, flat foundation, then whatever ruins they pushed off the top, then they used it as backfill for the eastern wall. So the ground actually sloped off at the eastern wall. And so that's why the eastern wall is much taller than some of the surrounding walls. Okay, how about some scripture? Jesus left and was going away from the temple when his disciples came to him to call his attention to its building. Yes, he said, you may well look at these. I tell you this, not a single stone will be left in its place. Even one of them will be thrown down. This is prophetic. As Jesus said at the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him in private. Tell us when all this will be, they asked, and what will happen to show that it is time for the coming and the end of the age. So these are going to be hard questions even for Jesus to answer. Jesus answered, watch out and do not let anyone fool you. Many men claiming to speak for me will come and say, I am the Messiah, and they will fool many people. You are going to hear the noises of battles close by and news of battles far away, but do not be troubled. Such things must happen, but they do not mean that the end is come. So again, prophecy says that to fulfill prophecy, because prophecy apparently has to be fulfilled, and we've seen that over and over and over again in the Bible. It's not so much that there was a prophecy, but the prophecy has to be fulfilled, apparently, because that's what God ordained. Countries will fight each other, kingdoms will attack one another, and there will be famines and earthquakes everywhere. All these things are like the first pains of childbirth. So he's talking about catastrophic things, but then lots of times he likes to draw parallels to something that people would understand, and that would be childbirth. Now, I stood by and watched as both my children were born. Dr. Goodwin asked me if I would assist on my first child. And I said, yeah, but I didn't come prepared. So he said, I'm going to show you what to do. So he gave me a pair of forceps, and he had already clamped off the umbilical cord at the appropriate places. And then he says, cut here. So I took that pair of forceps and I said, well, this can't be hard, but it was. It was a gristle. I didn't realize that the umbilical cord was tough. So it has to be for a child to hang on to its mother on the inside for that long. And so I finally got through it with a pair of forceps, and he said, good job. I helped. I wasn't prepared. Okay, let's go into a little bit of comment. And here's where everybody can shine. Again, got anything to say? We'll stop and talk about it. It seems as though the Gospel of Mark was the first to be written, and that Matthew and Luke relied on Mark to some extent in writing their Gospels. All three Gospel accounts began with the Jesus surprise announcement that the temple will be destroyed. And all three Gospels were written shortly after the Roman destruction of the temple in 70 CE. To see it destroyed a second time caused many to worry that Judaism and early Christianity would not survive. Thank God it did. The destruction of the temple shined a spotlight on the apocalyptic comment of Jesus' message. Apocalyptic, that's a hard word to say. Literature is usually born during times of great stress and dislocation. It points to the coming end of history, and the end that will only arrive after a period of warfare and persecution of God's people. That word apocalyptic or apocalypse. So I'm going to go to my movie reference there.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about a movie from 1979 that had that word in it.
It's that.
Apocalypse, man.
Brenda.
Colin Brandon.
It's based on Joseph Conrad's articles.
Yeah. So again, without remembering a whole lot about it, I may have seen it. I don't know, but I did read a little bit about the context of it. And talking to my wife about it, she said, well, the movie was all right, but toward the end, it got weird. But apparently, during the time of the height of the Vietnam War, there were some things that were not necessarily okay, even during war times. And a certain general or soldier was supposed to be held accountable for it, and then he was supposed to be extinguished.
Reality shoot down. Ventures.
Yeah, that type thing. The coming of the Lord is often associated with the second coming of Christ. Two other words could have been used in place of the coming, and that are presence and arrival. Okay, question for everybody. How does reading Jesus' apocalyptic message leave you feeling? Any ideas, any thoughts about if we were to be confronted with some type of apocalyptic message these days. And we knew that it came from an authority figure like Jesus was. How would we feel about it?
Makes you wonder with floods, famines, earthquakes, such as happening today, makes you wonder.
Yeah, because even now we have ways of predicting earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis after an earthquake, and things like that. But we still can't do much about it except get out of the way. And so we'll see that predicted in our next set of verses about the disciples ask, well, what are we going to do whenever we get word that something's going to happen? And so the next set of verses will talk about that, about Matthew 24:15-25 is about Jesus forewarning of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the signs of the end times, emphasizing the importance of the remaining steadfast in faith and readiness for his return. So again, this will be more about the message itself and what to look for and how to act if you've been warned. So, if we're warned about a hurricane or a tornado or something like that, and we've got enough time to react, then what do we do? How do we prepare for things like that? What goes on in your mind, or the poor people in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, they had no prior warning. They had no prior warning experience. No one had the experience to react fast enough had they known it was coming.
Period. When I volunteered in December at Samaritan's Purse. They showed us a video, and it was a lot of folks just taking pictures with their cell phones around the edge of the creek. And you hear something, and you see them all look at each other going, what is that? And about the time around the bend, it must have been a 50, 60-foot wall of a wall of water that came around. I mean, it was like a wave. And you could see everyone grabbing and taking off toward higher ground, but they had that one video. I mean, it was just make it get choked up because they didn't have a chance. It was higher than this church. I mean, the wall of water that came around the bend. They couldn't. So many of them couldn't move fast enough to get out of the way.
Yeah, and just like the more recent flood, it was in Texas whenever it swept the campers away. Then you saw walls of water. So apparently, the initial flood would come in and start piling up debris in a bottleneck in the creek or the river, and it would back up water and back it up and back it up and back it up. And it was getting taller and taller and taller behind this debris. And then all at once the debris couldn't take it, and it would flush everything out that was below it. So you thought it was bad, but it got worse. Okay, let's start with verse 15. You see the awful horror of which the prophet David spoke. It will be standing in a holy place. Then those who are in Judea must run away to the hills. So that is an avenue of escape. Run away to the hills. It's telling them where they need to go. Someone who is on the roof of a house but must not take the time to go down and get any belongings from the house. So they've been told what to do, to run, but they weren't told how to prepare because it came so fast. Now, what they're referring to here is the process of the Romans destroying the temple. So, did the Romans destroy the temple in a day? You would think so. Yeah. And it wasn't a week. It probably wasn't a month. Who knows how long it took, because they were going, according to prophecy, there would not be any stone unturned and no stone standing on another stone. So it would be leveled, decimated, desecrated.
There was Jewish symbols that collaborated
Yes.
Romans, it describes.
Yeah.
Destruction.
Yeah.
He had called up people, this, for the telling of the surrender, they wouldn't do it.
Mhm.
So then, was the Romans took the store.
Yeah.
They took Josephus back.
Yeah. Well, he was a writer and historian, and a very apparently an accurate historian. Okay, so he's talking about don't come down from the house. Well, how are you going to move to higher ground if you don't come down from the house? Well, apparently this was a city built like a lot of the buildings that you see now, where one house stops where another one begins. So they were actually supposed to go from rooftop to rooftop without going downstairs. So at least there's a possibility that they could get out of the city and over the wall to get to higher ground by going from rooftop to rooftop. Someone who is in the field must not go back to get a cloak. Again, if you are out, leave, don't go back. How terrible it will be in those days for women who are pregnant and for mothers with little babies. Pray to God that you will not have to run away during the winter or in the Sabbath. Again, why weren't they supposed to run away on the Sabbath? I was doing work. Even to save your own life, they were not supposed to work. For the trouble at that time will be far more terrible than anyone has ever seen before, from the beginnings of the world to this very day. Nor will there ever be anything like it again. But God has already reduced the number of days. Had he not done so, nobody would survive. For the sake of this chosen people, however, God will reduce the days. I'm not sure how the days are used there, but a lot of times in biblical writings, they talk about the days being accomplished. So I'm thinking that's the appointed time that certain things are supposed to happen. They're happening for a reason, and it has its own reason. Then, if someone will say to you, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "There he is," do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear. They will perform great miracles and wonders in order to deceive even God's own chosen people. If possible, I have told you that you will be prepared in time. Okay, we've got a few comments about those verses. Jesus begins his answer to the disciples' second question about the sign of his coming. He refers them to the prophecy of the book of Daniel called the abomination and desolation. This is not the sign of his return, but it is a precursor of it. He warns his disciples to flee Jerusalem as soon as they see the sign in order to escape the bloody danger that will instantly follow. So again, he's preparing them by telling them, if you're on the rooftop, move from rooftop, don't go down, don't get your stuff, get out of town. The disciples asked Jesus 3 questions after he told them that not one stone of the temple building will be left upon another. The 3 questions were, when will these things happen? They want to know. They want to be prepared. What will the sign of your coming? Okay. So if they're supposed to be prepared, they want to know how they're going to be warned. What will be the sign of the end of the age? So they're thinking about beyond what they've been told. They're speculating on what's going to become of us if we survive the initial onslaught of the terror or the horror. And the thing about this, in scriptures, Jesus answers the questions in reverse order. So we'll look at those a little bit as far as his answers. His answer to the 3rd question was, the sign at the end of the age will be when this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. This would occur after many birth pangs, such as wars and rumors of wars, natural disasters, and the breakdown of society. Again, they were worried about whenever the temple was, since the temple was the center of life, that once the temple was destroyed, what's going to unite the Jews or possibly the Christians? Because unity builds trust, unity builds strength. There will be false messiahs, persecutions, and betrayals, with the result that many people's love will grow cold. Again, the love of God, they were afraid was going to grow cold. Having answered the last question first, Jesus then began to answer the disciples' 2nd question, which was, what will be the sign of your coming? Ultimately, his answer boils down to, do pay attention to the things that must take place before I return, so you will be ready. And when I do return, you won't need a sign. Everyone will know who I am. So again, Jesus continues to follow God's plan and be known before things happen. So after they happen, I won't have to explain myself, who I am. You'll already know who I am. You'll have a presence. And then to answer the first question, people are fascinated with figuring out the details of the end times. Even Jesus himself could not say when it would happen, and used a mysterious language to speak of it when it would happen. So again, he was vague about answering the question about what will happen to us, because again, there was no definite, as far as I know, no definite prophecy as far as the outcome. It's just that it would happen and you're going to live through it if you believe in me and move on. So let's talk about the temple, the original temple, Solomon's temple. Now, historians say there may have been temples, a sign of a temple on the Temple Mount before Solomon, but that's not been verified. And there are other temples throughout the Christian world and the Jewish world to different things, but not the Holy Temple. In the early years of the Israelite kingdom, the Ark of the Covenant was periodically moved uh, among several sanctuaries, especially those of Shechem and Shiloh. After King David's capture of Jerusalem, however, the ark was moved to that city. This action joined Israel's major religious objects with the monarchy and the city itself into a central symbol of union of the Israelite tribes as the site for the future temple. David, whose Mount Moriah, or the Temple Mount, where it is believed that Abraham had built the altar in which he was supposed to sacrifice his son Isaac. The crowning achievement of King Solomon's reign was the construction of a magnificent temple in Jerusalem, often called Solomon's Temple or the first temple. So, the way I think about things, I was going to try to pull a Keith Garner out of my hat and use and use a joke, a catchy joke that would go along with this. And the one that I found, and I'm not meaning to be sacrilegious or anything, but where was Solomon's temple? And this is a joke, so think it that way. So where was Solomon's temple? On the side of his head. That's a dad joke. That's a dad joke. A granddad joke. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, Keenan. Keenan, you're up next. I'll be here all week. Okay. Okay. Let's get back to something serious. Solomon's father, King David, who wanted to build a great temple for God a generation earlier as a permanent resting place for the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the Ten Commandments. However, God had forbidden him from doing so. So why did he forbid David from building a temple? There you go. The important part. You will not build a house in my name, for you are a man of battles and have shed blood. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah with David's help. David helped procure the materials, which were a lot. I wish I had taken enough time to put together an equivalent in today's money or materials, what it took to build a temple, but it's massive. King Solomon provided materials for the building of the temple. From subterranean quarries at Jerusalem, he obtained huge blocks of stone for the foundations and walls of the structure. He entered into a pact with Hiram I, king of Tyre, for additional materials for the work, particularly lumber from the forest of Lebanon. So I used to belong to a rural church up toward Cleveland and Woodleaf. The name of that church was Lebanon Lutheran. And they took great pride in knowing that that was named after a place in the Bible that provided what kind of wood? Cedars of Lebanon. And so you look at pictures, and of course, my concept of what things could have looked like then and looked like now, you don't see many cedar forests in that area of the world. But apparently there was, and they were massive cedars. And cedar is a precious wood because it almost never rots. You can put it in the ground, make fence posts out of it, and they'll last 50 or 100 years or whatever. Eventually they will. They'll break down. But the cedar's Lebanon, and so I think in some of the writings about the temples themselves, they talk about the cedars of Lebanon were used. Solomon also provided a sufficient water supply to the temples. They carved out pools and created cisterns. The huge building project began under the direction of a skilled Phoenician workman in the 4th century of Solomon's reign. The biblical account reports that this involved 100,000 talents, which was 3,000 tons of gold. 3,000 tons of gold. 1 million talents, 30,000 tons of silver. Thousands of laborers and skilled artisans were reportedly employed in the work, many of them non-Israelite slaves who the Bible identifies as survivors of the wars of a conqueror to Canaan. The building is described at 60 cubits or 27 meters long, 20 cubits, 9 meters wide, and 25 or to 30 cubits high. If Solomon reigned from 970 to 930 BC, then he began building the temple about 966. A very interesting fact concerning the temple was there was no noise to be heard from the metal implements being used to carve the stones for the temple. You ever heard that? How did this come about? No noise from the metal stones, from the metal tools used to carve the stones. The material was prepared before it was brought to the building site. Solomon's temple, while it was being built, was built of stone prepared at the quarry, and there was neither hammer nor axe nor any iron tool heard in the house while it was being built. And this is from 1 Kings 6:7. So the stones were quarried off site. So anybody that builds anything knows what a feat that must have been, because they didn't just knock them out in chunks, bring them to site and work on them, chisel them, or whatever they had to do until they fit. They drew them on the walls of the quarry, and they were made to fit before they ever left the quarry. And these stones were not the size of a grocery cart. They were not the size of your typical SUV. Some of those stones were the size of a city bus. So I guess we need to move on, and we'll talk about some the burning question on the board. And okay, any more ideas about this? One twice. Okay, we got all the ideas. Yeah. Still like the bow tie thing? Okay, I'm gonna drop it down a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna ask you woodworkers out there. Now what is it? Yeah, it's a dovetail or butterfly joint. It is used to hold two pieces of wood together. Or what else was the temple made out of? Stone. Okay, so if you or chip a crevice into the stone that fits this, then you can put one of these in there to hold them together. Guess what they were made out of? What color have we got here? Yellow. What's yellow? What precious metal? Oh, gold. They were made out of gold. The reason that two stones were not going to be held together was that the easiest way to get this out of the stones or the wood was to set it on fire or melt it. And that's what the Roman soldiers did, because greed personally set the Roman nation on fire, because there was bazillions of dollars being used with gold bow ties or butterflies, or they also called them Dutchmen, to hold the temple stones and temple timbers together. So we've already been told that it's possible that they use 300,000 tons of staples. And one thing that crossed my mind was, as fragile as this could be, because it looks like a butterfly, but it's not, because it goes timbers and stones together. And again, building a fire in the temple to burn it down. And they talk, the Bible also makes reference that the molten metals actually seep down between the crevices of other stones. So if you got other structures here, then it's going to go down here. And so the Roman soldiers used pry bars, and they still had to work to get the gold out. So I was trying to remember certain people in the class here that would relate quicker to the bow tie, and I was thinking about Hap. Hap wears a bow tie occasionally. Who else wears bow ties? Okay. Keith, I got Keith. Kent, I've seen Kent wear them. Dr. John Cave wears them. Chris wears them occasionally. So
They have bow ties, son.
well, that's what somebody said. That's what somebody said. So the bow tie itself has great significance as far as, or the butterfly has great significance as far as what it can do, and it operated well. And the other thing is, because of the area that we're talking about, they were subjected to earthquakes, and that gave inflexible items. If this was stone, so this would flex. This would actually flex, but not break. It would hold its whole sway to the building, whatever the building was doing, because of a catastrophic earthquake or anything like that was going on. So again, that's the beauty of using something flexible to hold something almost immovable together. So let's wrap this up. Christian hope is defined by the belief that our future is secure in God. Whether this future involves our own death or the consummation of history in the creation of a new heaven and earth, our life will go on within the life of God. Amen.